I think that's all, yeah?
Yeah, I think I'll start. Good afternoon to our friends in Malawi. Good morning to those joining us from the UK. Whether online or in person, you're equally welcome to the forum, Takula Ndilani and Mulibwanji. My name is Natasha Maluza. I'm the SMP Communications and Engagement Officer here in Edinburgh. This meeting is being recorded and the recording will go online later today or tomorrow for anyone to view. We take your continuing participation in this meeting as you're consenting to being part of that recording. If taking part online, please would you ensure you appear under the name in which you registered and not in the device you are using. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat box and share your organization and or your email address if you wish. However, please note that the chat log will be added online when messages sent to everyone in this meeting are shared. If you send any direct messages in the chat, these are not shared, so please make a note of this yourself. Would ask you to remain muted, please, until invited to speaking during your Q&A sessions. If you would, then please unmute yourself. If possible, please would you also switch your video on when speaking so that our audio-visual system can focus on you. You are welcome to live tweet during the meeting. The social media handles will be shown on the screen shortly. Sorry for that. My computer has just gone a bit. Okay. We'd like to ask that you also switch on your video and speaking so that our audio-visual system can also focus on you. With around 90 minutes together during this Q&A discussion today, and all pre-submitted questions have been shared prior to the meeting with the High Commissioner. I'll now hand over to you, Stella Mesangano, the CEO of our sister-led organization, Malawi-Scotland Partnership.
Thank you, Natasha. Your Excellency, Madam Fiona Brown, the British High Commissioner to Malawi, let me add my welcome for you to join this meeting. To members of SMP, to members of Malawi-Scotland Partnership, you are all welcome. Takula Ndirani to this meeting. Kindly feel free and know that this is your meeting. Madam Fiona Brown, I recall you joined us in May last year when we had a hybrid meeting where you joined us from Edinburgh in Scotland. At that time, you were on holiday, and also as well as you are celebrating your 20 years of being a civil servant with DFID. We feel you do support us a lot. Madam Fiona Brown, let me tell you that after the meeting that we had last year, I did joke with David Hope to say you need to give us back Fiona. So of course he has given us. Now you're the British High Commissioner here in Malawi, working with the British High Commissioner, serving the interests of the British government. But we are aware that you are in Malawi, you are a Malawian, and you have the interest of Malawi in your heart. Thank you so much for that. And also, we are grateful for that. Let me now ask my colleague. Stuart Brown to take over from here. Stuart Brown is our interim chief executive officer for SMP, which is our sister member organization based in Scotland. So over to you, Stuart. Thank you.
Zikomo, Stella and Natasha, High Commissioner Fiona, Ritchie, friends, we too are thrilled to have this opportunity for ongoing dialogue. We have these now annual meetings and really appreciate, Fiona, how you make time for both of our networks and are really responsive through the year as well. The aim of this gathering is to keep connecting what's happening at a civic society level between Scotland and Malawi, and with the strategies, activities and impact of the UK government in the form of the British High Commission, who work hand in hand, as you've told us before, with FCDO, formerly DFID. As ever, we have our eyes and ears open to meaningful collaboration today. Fiona has agreed, as she's done before, to share updates and priorities from the UK government's perspective in Malawi. We've a range of questions that have been submitted by participants when registering, as Natasha has said. We'll cover as many of these as Fiona's time and our agenda permit, as well as taking spontaneous questions in the Q&A session. So now, may I pass over to you, Fiona, for an update and to hear about your priorities.
Thanks for the really warm welcome, Muli Banji, everybody. As Stella said, yeah, the last time I did one of these, I was based in Edinburgh. I think some of you already know I had to take a leave of absence from my job. I had to take care of my mum. So it was a very mixed time for me, but actually one of the highlights was really coming in to talk to all of you. It felt good actually to be in Scotland. Edinburgh is my hometown. It was nice to join from Edinburgh, but I have to say it's great to be back in Malawi. I came back permanently in the middle of June, and I've really sort of been getting my feet back under the table and feeling like I belong. And as Stella says, yeah, I'm an honorary Malawian, I hope. So it's been lovely to be in my second home, and it's great that we've got quite a positive forward-looking agenda, which is really what I wanted to talk to you about. And thank you all so much for the questions in advance. We will not probably be able to cover every single one of them. Some I will cover off in the priorities because they're priorities for you. They're also priorities for us. Others can come up in the Q&A. So let's just see how far we get to. Bear in mind, I'm on my phone. So if there's a bit of wobbling, that's what's happening. And it does mean I'm not monitoring the chat. And when we get to Q&A, I'm also not going to be able to write things down. So simple questions, please, would be really great. Yeah, so let me just kick off. Priority number one for us at the moment is ensuring macroeconomic stability. And the reason that is top priority for the UK government is that Malawi's sort of parlous economic state right now is having a huge impact on the lives of ordinary Malawians, on the cost of living. Inflation's 30% in Malawi. The government is basically sort of running out of money to buy basic commodities like fuel, emergency medicines, etc. And this is a really big challenge. The reason for it is complex and varied. It ranges from the impact of COVID pandemic, from the war in Ukraine, which has had such a huge impact on global food prices, global commodity prices, but also, frankly, it's because of unsustainable debt. So what we're really focusing on at the moment is working with Malawi to make sure that they can restructure the debt that they have and agree a deal that means that they're no longer broken by the huge payments that they have to make every month to repay that debt. Mostly that debt is to the international financial institutions, which is simple enough to agree a restructure, but also there's some bilateral debt. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's with other countries. So with China, with India, and a couple of other small European countries, but China and India are the largest sort of other country creditors, but also to two commercial institutions, so TDB Bank and Afrexim Bank. And that's where Malawi is a bit different to other countries that are in debt distress, because it's not largely what we call sovereign debt that is driving the problem, it's commercial debt. And that makes it that bit more complicated for countries like the UK, for institutions like the IMF to really agree a sensible deal. This has been ongoing for the last year to 18 months. It's been a really top priority for us, but it's become more and more urgent as Malawi's supply of foreign currency has dwindled, but also because we're getting really, really close to agreeing a program with the IMF. That program is not going to solve all of Malawi's problems, but it will agree a path forward to macroeconomic stability. It will include a debt sustainability strategy. It will include a deal with all of these creditors, and it will bring in some much needed foreign exchange. And the hope, and this is where economics is a bit of a science, but also an art and a bit of fortune telling. Hopefully it will also settle the markets and it will start to stabilize the exchange rate and gradually leave the Malawian government with a bit more in its coffers to deal with some of its major challenges. Now, how's the UK dealing with that? We are really using our expertise here in Malawi. We're one of the biggest missions. We have a full-time economist who has really been leaning in, influencing other development partners, working closely with the World Bank and the IMF, and working closely with the government of Malawi on a range of sort of technical support around what kind of debt restructuring is needed. We are also using our position as a major shareholder at the international financial institutions to lobby and push for a really positive board decision when this IMF programme does eventually make it to the board. So it's sort of all hands to the pump on this, because that's really going to be the single biggest thing that could improve life for Malawians over the near future. So the other big policy priority for us is consulting the Malawian government on a forthcoming UK white paper on international development. It's the first time for a while that we have felt like we've got the leadership in place at FCDO and potentially increasing ODA budgets over the coming years, and a real sense that we want to regain some space as a leader in international development. And to do that, we really need to talk to our partners. So we've been focused on talking to the government of Malawi about what they would like to see from the perspective of a least developed country, what they'd like us to focus on in this white paper. And it won't really be a huge surprise to you, but it's really about refocusing on sustainable development goals and trying to achieve those. And the forthcoming UN General Assembly is a real opportunity for that. We know that that's one of the UN's focuses, and we are sending a UK delegation to the GA with a real focus on explaining how the UK is going to contribute to that. And it's also about inclusive development and leaving no one behind. Now, of course, you all know very well that achieving that in a country with the significant challenges that Malawi has is really, really tough. We've been trying to do it for years and years with, some successes and some losses. And that's because this is a really challenging context. There's lack of capacity in government systems, there are real governance problems, and there are real corruption problems. So another focus on being as patient as possible and being clear about what we can achieve and how we can achieve it, but staying the course, I think, is another really critical one. And then I think money matters, and we are hoping to see a significant increase in our ODA budgeting for 24-25, up to a ceiling of around 50 million. It's hard to be really sure at the moment because we're so buffeted by global shocks, but that's our planning assumption. And that's a significant increase. But aid alone, and this is not just about the UK, this is about the global aid landscape, aid alone is not enough to address the challenges of poor countries like Malawi. And they recognise that the UK is coming with a full offer, all of which contributes to Malawi's development. It's not just our development programmes, it's our defence cooperation, it's private sector. So many British businesses operate in Malawi already. I'd love to see more. There are some significant barriers. One of my major focuses on trying to help the government reduce those barriers. It's also on cultural issues, and it's on sort of people-to-people links and exchanges. We have, we do not underestimate the impact that the Chevening scholarships and the Commonwealth scholarships have in terms of educating Malawians through the British system, strengthening those links. And it really gives us a sort of strong strategic partnership and friendship to help work through some of the tougher issues. Then I think third real priority would be climate. And a lot of you have asked questions about Cyclone Freddy. And had we had this conversation at the start of the year, then responding to Cyclone Freddy would have been our top priority, because at the time, that's exactly what it was. We jumped in really quickly with, first of all, a search and rescue team, and that team is currently in Morocco. So it's our team of people that sits waiting to get a request from government to step in and help. And they did a fantastic job. They actually saved lives by coming in and finding people who were sort of stranded by floodwaters. And then we also had an emergency medical team, and they helped deal with people who were injured and hurt, and left behind some kits that now the Malawian government is using. And we also really quickly pivoted our resilience programme to be able to provide cash and food support to those most in need. As you've all rightly pointed out, it's not enough. It's never enough in Malawi. That's one of the problems. And we are thinking about how we change our approach a little on climate resilience, environmental management, using some of the extra ODA that we're expecting to have in future years. But again, not just about ODA. So we can definitely spend more money on climate resilience. We can definitely work with the government on environmental management. I went to Palombe myself when I got back to the country just to see what it looked like on the ground. And you can read as much as you like about the devastating impacts of the cyclone, but seeing a destroyed village firsthand, it really, really brings it home. And I was asking, the farmers who'd lost their livelihoods what they really needed. And a lot of it is, yes, we need emergency response, but it's longer term systemic issues around land management, around planting trees, preserving trees that are there, around more sustainable fuel, and basically sort of changing agricultural processes, and encouraging people to have jobs rather than being subsistence farmers. It's the needs of what has to happen are so immense. It's going to take a long time. We need to prioritize that. But just an increase in our aid programming on climate isn't sufficient. We need to be tapping into international climate finance. We need to think about mindset change. We need to really think about what the private sector can do on this. I've got British businesses desperate to do more on renewable energy, but Malawi's not an easy place to do business. So, there's a big job to do there. Then I think the other thing we are focusing on, which is definitely more about aid programming, is food insecurity. And we know that the projections are that things will continue to worsen in Malawi year on year. This year, of course, Cyclone Freddy happened at the worst time. It devastated the harvest. We and the government are pretty anxious about making sure that people have enough food. Our resources are quite limited in this financial year. We are showing leadership by chairing a new World Bank Trust Fund on social protection, and we're putting a little bit of money into that. We recognize that this sector is quite fragmented in Malawi. It needs clear leadership, and we need to be ready to help the government with food and fertilizer and other kinds of inputs when they really need them. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, we're also pushing at the big picture level on economic stability so that the government coffers are not as bare as they once were. But that's also another sort of major focus. So I think I'm going to stop there. I've talked about others of our programs in past meetings, but I'm sure you'll have questions on some of those things and on completely different things. So I'm going to hand back to the chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Fiona. That's a very helpful overview. I wonder if we could start, if anybody would like to come back with any questions for Fiona on these 3 points of macroeconomic stability of the UK, the forthcoming UK white paper, including ODA and on Cyclone Freddy, including food security. Perhaps you could indicate if you've got a question in the chat box. Andrew, NPC, please, if you would unmute yourself, and ideally if you could put your video on so that we can track your movements with our AV system. Hello, Andrew.
Good morning. Thanks so much for recognizing me. And my name is Andrew for National Planning Commission as Research Manager. Fiona, thank you so much for a very elaborate and detailed update on how the British government is supporting Malawi in its very extensive challenges in the macroeconomic space. I would like to find out whether there are any prospects of considering the fact that we've had the projections almost 90% forecast that Malawi is likely to experience the El Nino conditions that will be associated with a reduction in rainfall patterns, as well as increasing temperatures and higher prospects of drought in this cropping season. I speak to this because we know that we're still an agro-based economy, and probably these early warning signals are supposed to be taken into consideration in terms of development partners' response as they're supporting the country to move out of these macroeconomic challenges. So I'd like to find out on your part, what do these focus, how do this focus speaks to your areas of work, and pretty much maybe the prospects of getting into any other interventions to prepare Malawi on how we can actually adjust ourselves towards, mitigating or maybe confronting with an appropriate response these kind of projections. I speak to these elements because they have a direct implication on the macroeconomic situation, which is already there as we speak. And I just wanted to poke our heads to say, how do we navigate through this kind of forecast terrain as we think about moving out of the macroeconomic quagmire that Malawi finds itself? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think Malawi has a great deal of challenges, and yes, external ones are really critical. And as you say, yes, the future projections for the impact of droughts, other forms of climate change, El Nino, changing weather patterns. When I was speaking to the farmers in Palombe, one of the things they were saying was the seasons have become much less predictable, and it's therefore really hard for them to know how to adapt and mitigate the risks because things are not happening when they used to happen. So I think that increased unpredictability is going to be a major factor, but early warning is really critical. And actually, most people would say that actually there was better warning for Cyclone Freddy than there have been for previous events. It's not prevented loss of livelihoods, but I think it did prevent loss of life. So that is particularly relevant. And then I think in terms of future projections, yes, that very much plays into how development partners build their programs. I think one of the problems, speaking very frankly, is that the Malawian government has got so many challenges facing it. It's hard to look long term, and it's much easier to look at what's right in front of you. And I think if you're the Minister of Finance right now, you are focusing on how you survive the next couple of months with dwindling reserves at the Reserve Bank and with dwindling foreign exchange. So really getting macroeconomic stability in the short term is a top priority. But what we are thinking through is how we as a sort of international community can come in with more support, social protection. So this trust fund that I described, that's partly around social safety nets. It's partly around helping where the Malawian government doesn't have the resources to provide fertilizer, emergency medicines, food. What more can the international community do? Some of that is about longer term approach, but in the immediate short term, that is about money. And that is one of the major challenges because most development partners at the moment are quite squeezed this year. So we are really looking at people like the World Bank, who I have to say have done an amazing job in recent months of shoring up the Malawian government's foreign exchange so that it can buy these emergency supplies. But really, it's looking around to see who's got additional resource in the short term to help. The president of Malawi is co-hosting an event at the UN General Assembly with the UN. I think it's probably going to be the head of UNDP who's the co-host. We are sending a British minister, we think, and that's a conversation around everybody needs to wake up and see that Malawi is really in trouble and what more can development partners do. But it is going to be tough. There isn't enough money to go around. So this is one of those tough things that political leaders will need to solve. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, Fiona. Thank you, Andrew, for the question. I think you mentioned in your opening remarks, Fiona, that on this question of unsustainable debt that you've been working on for 12, 18 months with the IMF, where, as I think you explained to us last May, some nations can't invest in Malawi. You're getting towards a point where there's going to be an agreement. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, I can't predict a decision. That is for the IMF board to make, but the runes are looking positive. We had the second in command from the IMF here last week, and we have a mission in town now, which is hopefully beginning to put together a draft programme. And the next job for us as the UK is to try and use our influence as a board member who's really supportive of this programme to try and work on those countries who might be a bit more sceptical. And if you think back, there are good reasons for other nations to be sceptical about Malawi's ability to stay free of unsustainable debt. And that's because the previous Reserve Bank governor was convicted of fraud. So things have gone wrong in the system in the past. It's not easy to tackle that. Countries have long memories. There's a lot of need globally. It's not just Malawi that's in trouble. So the question to be answered is why Malawi when we could help another country? Now, for us, that the answer is obvious, and we are pushing as hard as we can. But we need to have a really credible plan from government, and that's what we are working towards. It's not easy to renegotiate debt, and it's particularly not easy to renegotiate debt with private sector creditors. We are much better as an international community at negotiating sovereign debt. And that's what the Jubilee Drop the Debt campaign was so successful at. That's what the Paris Club is designed to do. We don't yet have really good mechanisms for handling commercial debt. And we may never do. So that it's really about helping the government of Malawi take its own sort of leadership journey on that. But again, I would highlight, if you're the government, people are starving, there's a lot of pressure for you to take out a loan, no matter the cost, in order to feed people now and worry about the longer term further down the track. It's really hard to keep your eye on the prize that approach, that status quo is not going to work in the longer term. So I really have so much sympathy for particularly the Minister of Finance and the President, but everyone in Cabinet who's got to make some tough choices.
Thank you. Alistair, you have a question about the banks.
Yes, this may seem very strange, but it's based on my experience working in Dar es Salaam. I spent 2 years working on the public sector reform program in Tanzania more than 20 years ago, which was a great success. The Tanzanians were perfectly genuine about wanting to tackle poor governance, ineffective work by the civil service, and so on. And the contribution of British aid was very helpful in not only turning the civil service round, but also in enabling the government to balance the books. Now, as a result, the Tanzanian banks ended up in a situation where they could no longer lend money to the government. And that was the thing that never happened to them before. And they had to lend money to the private sector. This has had huge benefits in terms of economic growth and increase in the formal employment sector. But it has also generated a certain amount of tension in Tanzanian society because the banks tend disproportionately to lend to people from China and from Indian heritage. Now, I know facing the current crisis, this may seem a very odd thing to be talking about. But, I just want to flag this up because if Malawi does actually turn the corner and things turn out well, which we have to hope will happen, then, I just want to say a certain awareness that this kind of issue can arise wouldn't go amiss. That's all I wanted to say, really.
Yeah, Alistair, that's a really interesting point. And I think it's kind of linked to the point I was saying earlier that we are all in sort of crisis management mode right now on the economy, and there will be unintended consequences of all the decisions that get made further down the line. The first one that government needs to really think about, and I can't stress enough, this is a decision that they have to own. It's around exchange rate realignment, because we have such a gap at the moment between the official and the parallel rate. But there's such pros and cons of that decision that the government really needs to think through the implications. But for now, the sort of commercial banks in Malawi, the private banks, are benefiting from that. They're not causing this gap, but they are benefiting from the misalignment of the exchange rate. Also, because the government of Malawi has been at pains not to take on any international unsustainable debt, domestic borrowing has really increased. It's very hard to tell what the future will be for domestic banking in Malawi. I really take your point on their incentives. They're private sector entities. They have to be driven by their shareholders and by profits. I think probably further down the line, some awareness of what the markets might or might not do will be much needed. But I'm no expert. I'm not an economist myself, but I think the markets in Malawi don't necessarily behave the way that we might expect, or the way that they do in other countries. So it's really too soon to tell what kind of lending commercial banks might get into in future. I do know that some international banks left Malawi within the last year. I think this was when I was out of the country, but because of the Forex shortage, there are some signs that they might be willing to come back. So I think that's something that we need to look at further down the line. And then the point you made about, and this is a real issue in Malawi, a sense of us and them between the Asian community and sort of, I'll call them ethnic Malawian community. We do need to be alive to anything that widens that gap. So yeah, point well noted. Thank you for raising.
Sigoweri Lasiska, you have your hand up. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Fiona, for the presentation. I've taken some notes from what you have presented here. I had some few questions, but I think for now, let me focus on one. I've been following on the work by FCDO in other African countries. I think mainly FCDO work in other African countries has focused on strengthening institutions, strengthening government institutions so that they can, the government can be able to mobilize domestic resources to support its own budget. I just want to know if there are any plans for Malawi to by you to help Malawi to strengthen the domestic resource model.
Hi, you broke up a little, so I'm just going to repeat back what I think you want me to cover and check that I've understood. So you're talking about institutional strengthening and capacity building, which I can definitely talk about. But did you mean with a specific focus on domestic resource mobilization or more broadly? Over. You're muted.
Yes, mainly on domestic resource mobilization, was saying that I think our budget has been sustainable because I think as a country we found ourselves in huge debt and that has been sustainable.
Okay, got it. So at the moment, we don't have any technical assistance with the Ministry of Finance or the bits of the government that are doing resource management. The European Union are currently providing a team of debt advisors to advise the minister on the debt sustainability strategy, which has been incredibly successful. And I don't know that the government would have got where it's got without that. It's extremely expensive. It's well beyond our budget to provide that kind of capacity assistance. I'm not going to tell you how much it is, but it would make you weep. But it is fantastic that a development partner has been able to provide that resource. They are incredibly professional, and that's why they don't come cheap. I think this is an area where we could consider more support to the Malawian government in the future. They would have to ask us for it and want it to come from a bilateral donor. That's not always the case in Malawi. This is a very politicized environment at the moment. We have done a lot of help behind the scenes. We do have a lot of economic advisory capacity within FCDO. We have facilitated some senior level conversations with our senior economists. But if further down the line, there's a real need and a request from the Malawi Ministry of Finance for, say, tax specialism, that is something that we could look at once our budget has increased. But I think potentially there are others in that space in Malawi who can do that. The World Bank is looking at doing more on public financial management, and that is those are some of the preconditions for their budget support program, which will come in once the IMF program has been agreed. So yeah, it's a good point. There are capacity needs across government. At the moment, we have focused our institutional strengthening largely on law enforcement and anti-corruption agencies. That's where the UK has felt like we've had comparative advantage, but I wouldn't rule out doing something in tax revenue, that space in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Sticking with budgets and Cyclone Freddy, you mentioned that the UK government's resources to respond beyond the really valuable emergency assistance that you spoke of, resources are quite limited. We heard from Dodma that Malawi is around £85 million short in being able to implement its relief and recovery project. I think you mentioned that the UK government's hosting a panel, and did I pick up correctly on that?
No, it's President Chakwera and probably the UN. So I think it's going to be the UNDP administrator. So they are co-hosting, and this is where President Chakwera is really trying to show global leadership as a least developed country, one who experiences more greatly than other places the impacts of climate change. But we will be attending that at senior level. I'm expecting a UK minister to go. The challenge is finding enough money in the system for the immediate response. And, you know, you'll see sort of crises in Morocco and Libya. There's always a lot of need for emergency response support, and the need currently outweighs global supply of that kind of resource. So I think the only thing we can really do, working with DODMA and others across government, is prioritize as ruthlessly as possible and really focus on responding quickly and appropriately when a crisis happens, but really doubling down on our preparation. So there's a range of things that we can do better and differently. Disaster risk insurance is something that has become more prevalent recently, and it has worked in Malawi's favor in the past. So that's something that we can do more of. But to be honest, you know, why was the loss of life so severe in Malawi? Some of it is about environmental management. So you see, you know, villages wiped away because the hill has turned into a river. There not been enough trees to bind the soil together. And it's interesting to see local communities understand that and see it with their own eyeballs and really know that they need to change the way that they live their lives, frankly. And that's a tough thing to do. If you're living on the breadline, any change is high risk. But you know, government needs to think about how it moves people away from the more vulnerable areas. That's a land management issue. People need to stop chopping down trees. They need alternative sources of cooking fuel, and we do have a program that looks at that. But part of the problem is also much broader and deeper. It's the illegal charcoal trade, which is frankly a cartel in Malawi. So there are dark forces working against us in terms of trying to change the way people operate in Malawi. So it's a real uphill struggle, but I think we can do more as the UK and collectively. And I think when I got back to Malawi, one of the things I said to the president was, I put my hand on my heart and said, I don't understand international climate finance. And if I don't understand it, how does a massively overstretched government ministry in Malawi understand how to access that finance and use it? So I made a personal commitment to get more of a grip on that. So that's another part of our climate strategy is making sure Malawi can tap into every single piece of resource that it can. And that will really double down on Malawi's own leadership internationally on the need for a deal that works for least developed countries.
Dr. Barry Klassen.
Thank you, Stuart, and good morning, everyone. Can I don't want to detract from the economic realities and the difficulties, but as the lead of the Scottish Emergency Medicine Malawi project over the last 9-10 years, I just wanted to pick up on your consultation with the Malawi government on the UK's white paper for international development. You may be aware that last week the First Minister in Scotland produced their programme for government, and within that, in international development, there was a pledge to increase the support in health, particularly, and obviously that's my sphere of influence, non-communicable diseases. One of the most important of these is a provision of a sustainable national network of emergency care in Malawi. We began that project just pre-COVID. It had to halt because of COVID, and then our funding was removed, of which we're awaiting to get it back hopefully from Scottish Government. What level of coordination and collaboration does the UK FCDO have with going forward with your white paper, the white paper and the consultation with Malawian government have that coordinates it with the Scottish approach?
So the answer at global level is I don't know. That will be for the central white paper team to be engaging with the Scottish government centrally, and I'm sure they're doing that. But on health, particularly with the Scottish government here in Malawi, we work really, really closely. So my health advisors work really closely with John and his team to really figure out where the gaps are, where Scottish Government ODA can work alongside other partners. It's not just FCDO ODA, it's actually trying to be more coordinated across the whole sector. And we have what we call the Health Sector Joint Fund. It's not a pooled fund, but it's as close as you can get to pooled funding in the Malawi context, where there's a government-led strategy for how it improves health systems and healthcare delivery. And then individual development partners have their own funding that is targeted across all those priorities. And the Scottish Government is planning to come on board with that approach, which I think is really fantastic because it will make the most of what is overall UK ODA. And I mean, there are so many needs in the health sector. And for us from the UK, it's really about what we think we can do as another government is really push at the strategic level, at the ownership level of the Malawian government, and to help them implement rather than doing service delivery directly ourselves, which is a model we have tried in the past based on huge needs on the ground. But we really want to push this as the best model for Malawi. The next step is trying to get on board some of those massive vertical funds like Gavi and the Global Fund, because they are the ones that have got huge amounts of money to bring to the table and that have been very successful actually in pushing specific individual objectives, particularly around HIV/AIDS. And I don't want to knock that, but it doesn't always help the Malawian government take a broad approach to priorities and to delivering against those. And I really do agree, emergency medicine is critical. You only have to, I mean, people get ill all the time. It's not a healthy place. I completely recognize that. But you only need to drive on a Malawian road for 15 minutes before you realize that trauma medicine is also hugely important. So Barry, that's really, really welcome. And thank you for raising it.
No, thank you for your answer. I mean, I just wonder how we can maybe access that sort of that global fund funding as well, because the need is really a present need. The Malawi government approached us after we developed the first adult emergency and trauma centre in Blantyre to do the same in the other big central hospitals in Malawi. That project had phase 1 of it, and then COVID halted it. But we're very keen in Dundee to get back to delivering that. And any support we can get, because I think the Scottish International Development is waiting some progress they're trying to make with things, but we want to honour the pledge we made to the Malawian government to deliver them a national network, and it will help with all these other problems. You mentioned Cyclone Freddy, and that happened on the back of an epidemic of cholera. And if you had resilient, sustainable emergency departments delivering quality emergency care, which actually, as the WHO say, is a human right on this planet, not a luxury. Yes. The access to emergency care should be a human right. And if we can do anything to collaborate with you to maybe get access to some of these bigger global funds to see this project through, we'd be delighted.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I mean, my heart was in my mouth after Cyclone Freddy, thinking, how bad can the cholera epidemic get? And I'd love to say that the reason it didn't get worse was because of great systemic engagement from development partners, or because the Ministry of Health suddenly were able to really tackle problems at source. I don't know why it didn't get worse, but it didn't, and we're just grateful for that. But next time, maybe not so lucky. And I really do agree with you on the importance of emergency medicine. I do not think I would have good news for you on accessing those big vertical funds, because they mostly do their own delivery. It's just not their operating model. But I think, I will definitely raise your points where I can, keep raising the flag. Keep trying, because you're right, it is important.
Thank you. Michael McKenzie.
Hi, Fiona. I'm going to stick with health, although obviously economy is very important. And also just try to be a bit more positive in a way, because I think in the UK and in Malawi and around the world, one of the big success stories has been vaccination, obviously in the last few years with COVID, and that thinking about it in the future, there is cholera, which we've just had and will surely raise its head again, which is a vaccine preventable disease, as well as the great news about the malaria vaccination. And obviously Malawi's leader in in the world, really, in terms of being able to deliver that. And I just wondered about the people in your health unit, how they're engaging with the the EPI there in Malawi in terms of trying to help them support what is surely a very cost-effective set of interventions with vaccinations, and is cross-cuts, building up institutions like the EPI to as we develop vaccine science, and there's great work being done there. So is that an institution that you engage with and you can see yourself engaging with in the future more?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. And thank you for bringing a positive to the conversation. Sometimes it's hard, and we always talk about our challenges in Malawi. But a few weeks ago, possibly even a few months ago, I hosted very briefly visiting APPG, led by Patrick Grady, who were here to look at health issues, and we talked a lot about the malaria vaccine at that time, and it is properly exciting. I think it's really brilliant that Malawi is pushing forward with that, and I think probably we could do more as the UK to publicize it. And I do agree with you that vaccines is one major success. I think throughout COVID there was definitely an issue around equity, and there were times where it felt as if developing countries were exporting their vaccines that were about to expire to the developing world, and hoping that they could make use of them. So I think focusing on in the future, what did we learn from that? How could we make sure that we don't leave anyone behind through future vaccinations is really welcome. And actually, I think the malaria vaccination is not targeted at the developed world. So this is one where we can show that actually together we are focusing on things that affect poor people. The team are definitely really plugged in, but I suspect that that's a relationship that we could and should develop further. I'm really up for good news stories about anything that's happening in Malawi. So yeah, point very well taken. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. That's great. I hope that does work out, because it's a great. The EPI is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thanks, Michael. Dr. Charles Lehman Kachitsa submitted a question on climate change and net zero, and then turning to Fiona Gregg at Link Education. Charles, please.
Yes, I did submit a question on climate change and what the UK government is doing in order to support countries like Malawi to move towards net zero. But listening to your presentation, I came up with 3 more areas that I wanted to ask you about, one of which is health. I know there is a program, and a student exchange program, or call it a university exchange program, by the University of Manchester, where this year they went to Kenya with a number of expert doctors, and the team included some medical students. And I hear it was a very successful program. So I was just wondering if you support similar programs, and this time maybe a team going to Malawi, and how that can be done. The second one is on Malawi's priority areas, and one of which is the president recently mentioned that they would want to move towards mega farms. So you mentioned priority areas that you are focusing on to help the government. Is this one of the areas? And if it is, how are you going to help the government to achieve its objectives of having mega farms and in turn food sustainability in the country? And the last one is on sports. I know in the past we have had, again, exchange programs on sports, which contribute to social development and well-being. Is there any, whether it's a small program that you are doing in order to contribute to this area? So those are my questions. Thank you.
No problem. I'm going to deal with the mega farms one first. We are sort of cautiously welcoming of the government's plans for mega farms. We definitely definitely agree with the strategy that agricultural productivity needs to improve. We know that Malawi is a nation of subsistence farmers, and that is not really a viable economic strategy for the country to survive in the future. People are too vulnerable. It doesn't lift them out of poverty. And what we would like to see is those farms that have the possibility to contribute to the wider community should receive as much focus and support from government as possible. And then subsistence farmers, really, it's about what social safety nets are available to help them and to improve their quality of life, and maybe in future to be employed rather than to just live sort of hand to mouth. So we know, the agricultural inputs program, fertilizer subsidies is a hugely politically charged issue in Malawi. The government itself has said they know this program needs to be reformed because they can't afford what's happened to the cost of fertilizer, maize. It's not an affordable program for the government anymore, and it's not really driving the kind of agricultural productivity that we need to see. So at a principle level, yes, we definitely support government, and we've helped with a lot of analysis. On mega farms, we really want to remain engaged. It's more likely to be at a sort of policy advisory level than it is about financial support. We don't have a lot of direct agricultural programming in Malawi, but what we do support, because Malawi is such an agricultural economy, all of our programs really have an impact. But the one that we have just got off the ground is a component of our trade and investment program. And what we want to do is help Malawi investigate high value crops for export. So to really focus, we haven't chosen which crop we might look at yet, but we've looked at a range from chilies to macadamias to avocados to hemp and sort of medicinal cannabis, because that's a potential growth area in Malawi. And we want to pick one of those and look at the whole value chain and think about what the barriers are to Malawi getting economic growth through focusing on that particular sector. It's a small contribution, but hopefully it will help really demonstrate that you can make a lot of money out of certain crops, and that Malawi could do more to exploit those. Of course, the barriers will be huge, and they will range from power, infrastructure, roads, visas, a whole range of different issues that will potentially be solvable, and some of them will take a lot of work. But let's see what comes out of that. Your other two, I'm going to take a little bit together because they're sort of around exchanges between UK institutions and Malawian institutions. We fully back from FCDO all kinds of information, expertise exchange between UK institutions, Malawian institutions. I just did a great reception to send off the 40th cohort of Chevening scholars and some Commonwealth scholars to the UK. So that's something that I really value in terms of Malawians going to the UK to learn and help improve those UK institutions. It's not a one-way exercise, and then bring back that expertise to Malawi. Sports also, I think, is another area. We did quite a lot around the Commonwealth Games to try and focus on Malawian sports people. We don't have any specific government-sponsored schemes that I'm aware of right now, and we may not get into that. But to the extent that a British institution would come to us and ask for some kind of assistance in setting something up or getting the right contacts in the system, we would be more than happy to help on that, because I really do think that's valuable. And the people-to-people links are what make this friendship between the UK and Malawi so special.
Thank you very much. Fiona Gregg.
Hello, Your Excellency. So as you'll be aware, the UK government has really provided global leadership through the Girls' Education Challenge, which is the largest global education portfolio in the world. Link Education has been working in Malawi in education since 2006, and we've been delivering the Girls' Education Challenge and a Leave No Girl Behind project. With all the other pressing needs, debt relief, climate shocks, how do we ensure that the gains and learning from this wonderful Girls' Education Challenge programme aren't lost and are continued?
Yeah, that's a really good challenge. It's not easy. And I think one of Malawi's biggest challenges is that public services, and particularly education, health, are struggling to keep pace with population growth, and that's exactly the problem. How do you not lose gains? I don't have a great answer for you, if I'm honest. We do have significant education programming here in Malawi, led by the FCDO. It focuses a lot on what is systemic rather than capacity building necessarily. We're doing a lot on curriculum. So currently we're helping the government reform the maths curriculum, and we've done a bit of people-to-people exchange as part of that. We've sent some experts from the curriculum authority here to the UK to do some learning. But really what we want to do is achieve something that will be countrywide as much as possible through that. And then we did also have our focus on women and girls is throughout our education programming, and we did do a specific piece of work to look at how to focus down on girls, get them back to school after COVID, because we know that teen pregnancy rates went up because nobody was going to school. So we did quite a lot of after school activities. We did some mentoring, and we tried to encourage girls to go from primary school onto secondary school. But it's tough in the current context to make sure that we've got enough resource and focus on this, and we will continue to try and not lose education gains that we've made so far. But yeah, it is one among many competing priorities. But if you lose a generation, then you're really in trouble as a country. So it is a priority, and I know it's a priority for the government as well. They actually do manage to ring fence some government funds for education in a way that I've seen not happen in other countries, and there's even more expectation that development partners will step in.
Thank you very much. Can I just add something to the previous question too? So Link's also been running a sport project, which has been through netball, and through that we've had some fantastic gains improving girls' self-esteem, their attendance at school, and their educational attainment as well. So it's quite exciting. Quite a small project that's come to an end now, but so projects are going on like that.
Yeah, good. I mean, wider benefits. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Dr. Connor Snowden.
Yes, hi there, and hello from Edinburgh. It's really great. I was very lucky to be in Malawi back in May on Erasmus Plus, one of the last ones. If you can have any influence on rejoining that scheme, I'll flag that up. But one of the things
you don't like to give me a challenge, do you?
No. Most of our links with Malawi institutions have been around health, and from what you're saying, there's obviously big challenges in terms of economy and that area. Just very briefly, do you see sort of research potential in some of those areas? What are those areas where there might be a slightly more longer term research need? Because we're part of the FCDO, the Global Development Delivery Framework for Research, and that's where some of the sort of calls and opportunities come through. Might there be research opportunities?
Do you know, Connor, there might be, but I don't want to risk steering you in the wrong direction. I would rather that you got that from one of my health experts, because what I mostly say in terms of priorities for Malawi is get the basics right. And I don't know if there are any research gaps on the basics or whether it's really about implementation and delivery. But, reflecting what Dr. Mike said earlier on, vaccines and innovation, just because Malawi needs to focus on the basics doesn't mean that there isn't space for brilliance. One of my favorite things that I did in recent years was when the now Duchess of Edinburgh came to announce the ending of sort of blinding trachoma in Malawi. That was really, really positive. So I'm really on the lookout for things where a positive change can be made quite quickly, or areas where the Malawian government itself really wants to focus but doesn't have the expertise itself. But I would really want one of my health advisors to say what those might be.
One of the other things just to flag is there's Edinburgh's just launched its next generation of the MasterCard Foundation scholarships. So we've got about 850 full master scholarships for African students over the next few years. So it could be that there's sort of targeted recruitment in various countries coming shortly. So just to flag that as opportunities for expertise development.
That would be great.
Thanks.
Thanks, Connor. Dr. Aaron Comby had a question on support for cultural heritage and tourism. Aaron, would you like to come in? It was some time ago. Apologies, Aaron. You've been waiting patiently, but we've been swirling around with different topics. If you're able to unmute yourself and come in, Aaron, that would be great.
I think we may have lost him. I can't see him on the call at the moment.
Thanks, Chad. Matthews and Fiona had a related question.
Yeah, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Your Excellency, I'm Matthews Mfune from a cultural tourism and join Malawi Cultural Heritage Association. We're working with our colleagues from the Department of Museums and some other partners from Sport and Malawi Partnership, where we're trying to promote our cultural tourism because we believe it's one of the areas which can help Malawi to create more jobs, more wealth for people, especially in the rural areas. As you know that the Malawi 2033 vision is also putting tourism as one of the better areas. We do not know if the British government has got any plans at some point to take part in such programs in terms of promoting that job and wealth creation for especially the rural areas, because cultural tourism is mostly to deal with the rural people. So we don't know whether your government has those plans to look at that program going forward.
Thanks very much. That was a bad echo. Did everyone else? It's gone. Great. Look, we do agree that Malawi has massive potential as a tourist destination. We know that there are a lot of barriers to that. We probably don't have any plans to do any programming or specific interventions or research in this area. Where I tend to focus is what kind of diplomacy and influence we can deploy on that. So we have a good relationship with a really dynamic Minister of Tourism who's got big plans for Malawi. But I think where the British government can most helpfully focus is on highlighting that potential, encouraging people to visit Malawi, but also encouraging the government to try and tackle some of the barriers. And those would be infrastructure, lack of direct flights, visa regime, and then frankly the cost of those activities once you get to Malawi. It's more expensive to do safaris in Malawi than it is in some of the neighboring countries, and I think that cost is prohibitive for international tourists, and I think what Malawi needs to think about is how does it present itself as a good competitor compared to its neighbours. And I also think this is an area where I'd really like to see private sector growth and investment. So it is something that we think is important as FCDO, and I do talk to the government about tourism. I'm happy to do more, but it's probably more on this sort of diplomacy influence space than it is on programming. Thank you.
Thank you. Benjamin Carey is a tourist expert. Benjamin, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much. I agree there are lots of barriers to tourism in Malawi. I think probably one of the biggest opportunities is Vera, who of course was chief executive of the Malawi Scotland partnership, is now new Minister of Tourism, and I've got high hopes because she really understands community development and international development. I think there's a real opportunity to recognise that tourism is not just about the private sector, but there's a massive need for facilitation by the public sector and making the connection between tourism and climate adaptation. I've been doing a master plan for Bangladesh recently, and one of the things we're doing there is showing how if you've got a very limited tourism sector, then there's an opportunity to leapfrog all the technology, and if you're developing waterborne activities, bring in the best technology for electric boats and make sure that that's part of the marketing narrative. And we've got some great engineers in Scotland, and it would be really nice to sort of work between academic institutions between Malawi and Scotland to sort of bring in some of that technology and sort of share the know-how, so that tourism isn't just seen as people going on holiday, but it's something which will be transformational for rural communities, particularly along Lake Malawi, but sort of interior as well. And I think there's a great opportunity to see tourism as much more than the private sector, but actually completely transformational, particularly for rural communities. I mean, I think one of the problems in Malawi is that tourism there's a much more focus at the moment on the urban space, because there's a lot of urban migration, and there's a real risk that the sort of rural communities will be left out, because there's so much heritage there, but there's limited interpretation. I mean, I know Matthews has been doing a lot of work on this recently, and looking at how we can sort of, through your diplomacy, I mean, share how much there is, but also recognizing that tourism is not just about tourism.
Yeah, absolutely. It has much wider benefits. I think frankly, you know, Vera's fantastic. I think she's got full of energy and she does really get it and she has a vision. The challenge will be Malawian government capacity. And that's why I think we can't rely on that. And it will need private sector involvement in the short term. I think it's a long-term goal to really think about it in the way that you're describing. And I'm all in favor of it. I think it would be great. But yeah, I think it's going to take a pretty holistic approach. You are right that there is more that we can do in terms of influence and how we talk about it here. And as you say, how we link it with climate change and environmental management, for sure.
Okay, I may follow up with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Benjamin. I'll turn to Raimundo in just a second, but also to note that Tione asks in chat whether the recording of this will be made available. It will be, Tione. It will be made available to everybody afterwards, including the contents of the chat. Raimundo, would you like to come in, please?
Could I just jump in to say we only have about a minute, just to make that clear?
Sorry, Fiona, say that again, please.
Just to say, I probably only have about another 10 minutes, I'm afraid, because I have another meeting to go to. So just to make that clear when people ask questions. Thanks.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Raimundo, I don't know if you can unmute yourself. Vitumbiko Tembo, you put a question in chat. Would you like to come in?
Yeah, hello everyone. I was just asking, I think growing up in Malawi, I think technical education has been mostly discriminated. You know, most people are encouraged to go to public universities like Chanko, Malawi University and all. So, but still, we cannot say these universities recruit as many Malawians as we would want to see educated. So as we know, education is like one of the key tools towards contribution to the economy of the country. So I just wanted to know, what is the British government doing about advocating for, let's say, technical colleges that are available in Malawi, but most Malawians are not really aware of, or pretty much discriminate them because they have been shut down by the community or societies. Yeah.
So can I check that I'm understanding the issue? The issue is that technical colleges, maybe universities, but mainly technical colleges, are not encouraging applications from Malawians, or they're not, like, places are not available to Malawians. Is that the point you're making?
They're mostly not encouraged they're not like well accepted by society. To say, if you're going to a technical college, most people consider you as to have not done well in school. Yeah, something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, I've seen other other projects being implemented by TVET. I think I worked with them where we were trying to advocate for boys and girls in rural areas to keep applying to technical colleges where they can become mayor plumbers, whether it's electricians, you know, still. Right. Yes, like that. So I just wanted to know if the British government is also investing in that. Yeah.
So, I mean, that is an issue that is not unique to Malawi. I mean, certainly in the UK, we've seen changes over the decades about, you know, reclassifying colleges and sort of vocational institutions as universities, it's a form of snobbery, isn't it? That we think vocational education is somehow less important or less prestigious than a university degree, and it's not the case. And certainly Malawi needs a range of skills and expertise across a range of sectors. We are not active in secondary education or tertiary education. The EU is probably the biggest development partner in TVET. So I'm sure this is an issue that they're really focused on. However, I do have conversations with chancellors of various different universities and various different institutions, and we have a great relationship with the Minister of Education. So I can certainly raise some of these issues, but it's not something that the British government has got particular programmatic or funding responses to. But you make a good point, and I think it's valid, and I'm very happy to raise it as needed.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm trying to pick up a couple of general points that had come through, kind of clustered questions. One, that a theme that came up often was around youth support and youth unemployment in Malawi, and what the UK government might be able to do to support that. Also a question on gender-based violence and the UK government's support for that.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Youth is one of the themes that's come through on in the white paper consultation, basically, that we talk about youth a lot, and we do. I talk about Malawi having a growing young population. We talk about the threat of those people not having enough jobs, but that we don't do very much about it. And I think that's a really fair challenge. We don't do much about it because it's hard to know exactly what you do at a strategic level, other than we try to encourage the government to stick to their sort of campaign promise to, is it now 1 million jobs that the president committed to coming up with during his first term, and that has not materialized due to a range of different factors. I don't have a great answer. We hope that our full suite of development programming and our sort of diplomatic interventions will help at a sort of indirect level. In terms of direct youth programming, I'm not sure we have anything on the cards, but certainly as we are thinking about getting ready for the election in 2025, we want to do a little bit more on civic space and engagement. And I think engaging youth who will be eligible to vote in 2025 will be a key part of that. So we'll be thinking about how we engage with civil society groups, with media, with parliament, and community leaders on how we do that. But it's kind of an ill-formed thought at the moment. But it's a really good challenge. So keep pushing us and keep pushing others on what more we do specifically on youth. It's a tricky thing to do, except in sort of small patches. And I think Malawi needs a much more strategic approach across the whole country. Violence against women. Yeah, this is one of the things that I've been saddest about since I got to Malawi. When we were having to cut our aid programming, we did have a standalone violence against women and girls program run by the mission here. We tried to protect it, but in the end, we reached a commercial decision with our supplier that it was no longer commercially viable to run the program with the funds available. So really, really sadly, we closed that one down. It had come up with an incredible range of lessons. It delivered quite a lot in a short space of time. And we used those lessons to work with other partners here, but also to help a new centrally managed program be developed. So one of our colleagues in HQ is responsible for a new program, which is around supporting survivors of sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment. It will operate in Malawi. I don't have to my fingertips exactly what it will do, but it's got a significant amount of resource in Malawi, and it kind of picks up where our previous program left off in terms of focusing down on priorities. There are a lot of people active in this space in Malawi, which is great. So there's quite a community of development partners working on violence against women. And we also have that embedded as an approach across our health programming, where we focus really on the most vulnerable. We are hoping that over the coming years, we will also be able to do a little bit more around family planning, which is another area where we had to spend a bit less money. Luckily, our US colleagues were able to step in and pick up some of the slack on procurement of commodities, but we do really want to maintain a focus on that area as we develop our programs over the coming years.
Thanks very much. I think we've got a couple of minutes of your time left. Fiona, really appreciate your frankness and your time. Mike Beresford, you had a question. Mike's been patiently waiting and submitted a question in advance. So just in the interests of time, Mike asked, can we please have more lobbying for government-backed small project funding for WASH and healthcare projects? It's now almost impossible to get funding for medium-sized, under £100,000 projects.
Yeah, I wish I was going to have good news for you on that front, but neither the UK government nor Scottish government is looking like it's going back in the direction of small grants. That's a political decision made by ministers. I do understand how deeply frustrating that is for small organisations who think, well, just a small amount of money would be transformative. Part of the reason is that we have really intense requirements around due diligence in order to fund any organisation, and actually that places a huge burden on us as well as staff to manage that. So it's a strategic decision to try and focus on bigger size projects and programmes. I know that that's not what you're going to want to hear, but I'm pretty sure that the Scottish Government will be saying similar things. They're also trying to reduce the number of small grants they have. Over the years, we've had a number of different projects and programmes trying to create umbrella programs where smaller organizations can feed in with sort of varied degrees of success. It's always been slightly imperfect. So yeah, I appreciate your frustration. I don't see that changing over the next couple of years, but wait and see.
Again, thanks for the frankness, Fiona. Final question, Professor Heather Kuby.
Hello, Fiona. Thank you so much for giving so much of your time. A practical question, going back to your starting point of emergency responses. We know because of the failure of crops and the harvest from Cyclone Freddy that there will be food insecurity. Can you give us any indication of when you think that will reach a peak? Because I was thinking that civil society in Scotland and through the SNP often responds so positively, and if one has warning, then it might avoid an emergency response.
Yes.
I wonder what thoughts were. Thank you.
So we do know, so some things happen in Malawi that are predictable and some things happen that are less predictable. So we do know that there will probably be some kind of cyclone or storm. We know roughly what season that might happen in, but we don't quite know when. We do know that there's an annual lean season. And traditionally, one of the things we've been trying to move away from is treating that as a crisis response, because we know when the lean season is, and it's roughly sort of October, November. And we know that it happens every year. We have data that suggests that it's going to be worse this year than last year. I don't want to get into technical details about IPC categories, but we are going to have more people in acute need this year than we've had before. We already know that, so the time is now to start thinking about what might be available. We try to do cash transfers as much as possible because that is, it gives people agency over how they spend their money, and it is least disruptive to markets. But food assistance is also sometimes needed. In the aftermath of Cyclone Freddy, we did food assistance in Palombe because the expert advice was that the markets weren't functioning, so there was nothing to protect there, and actually people couldn't afford to buy food with the money we would give them. So different approaches for different places. But yeah, perhaps this is something that we can discuss with Stuart and colleagues, what information we can get you about what and when. Very happy to take that away.
Thank you very much.
That'd be very useful. Thanks, Fiona. You've covered a huge range of topics there. Thanks so much for your time. Apologies to everybody who put a question in chat or before that we didn't manage to cover. We'll share these with your office, Fiona, if that's okay, and we'll pass it on, like any answers that are possible. Thanks so much. Thank you very much indeed. Stella,
thank you so much, everybody. Sorry not to be able to stay to the end, but it's been great to see you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. Stella, may I pass to you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stuart. Is Fiona around or she's gone? She's gone, yeah?
I'm afraid I think she's had to dash.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much, everyone who is in here. Let me thank you for your time and also for listening to Her Excellency Madam Fiona Brown. Indeed, we have a lot of tasks to do. If we listening to her talking about the desk structuring, the issue, what is happening in the space of climate change, hefe, what is happening in trade and investment, I think as development partners, we have a lot of things, or we have tasks, a lot of tasks, or we have a burden that is we have to resolve. So indeed, I would agree with her to say we have a gap in terms of skills. We lack skills. That is an area that it requires us to also maybe to look at, because if people are skilled, we should be able to get a lot of things done. So take home message that I would say is quoting Fiona Brown is let's get the basics right. So thank you so much once again, and for your time, and also for the questions that you have put forward to Madam Fiona Brown. I know the speech, I know the discussion has been very interactive, and we are looking forward that maybe she also have next time to come and also address us. So this is quite invigorating, and also, yeah, we've learned a lot of the interventions that are going on. Thank you. Over to you, Natasha. Thank you so much.
You're just muted, Natasha.
Oh, sorry for that.
Thank you.
Just want to thank everybody for attending this event. For the next couple of weeks, we have our S&P events, which I'm currently showing you on the screen at the moment. I'll just give you a minute to just look at the upcoming events so that you can mark your calendars. Yep. And sorry, technical issues here. Thank you for that. In the next couple of minutes, we'll be sending you a survey email to you for just a 2-minute survey. We empathize with anyone with the survey fatigue as well. This is a very short, brief one, aims to improve what we offer and is a requirement for our donor reporting. So we'd be grateful for your time and input. And at this moment, I'd like to close this event, and we hope that you all have a lovely day in Malawi and in the UK and wherever you're also calling from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, everyone.
Natasha, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.